Brought to you by Penguin.
Strange Flowers by Donal Ryan. Read by Donna Nikolaisen.
In memory of Sophie Christopher, whose loss to this world is immeasurable. Genesis. All the light left Paddy Gladney's eyes when his daughter disappeared. All the gladness went from his heart. His days had always been so full of peace. Before Moll went, he pedalled round the parish in the mornings with the post, and he herded and foddered in the afternoons on the farm where he was caretaker, and he walked the fences and checked the gaps and gates, and his wife Kit kept house in their small tidy cottage, and she did the books for a few local business people. And his daughter, his only child, went to school and learned her lessons, and they knelt every night before bed for the rosary, all three of them. And they had a radio and a dresser and a yard of hens, and a green and yielding world around them in every direction. The Ara Mountains behind them, and beyond the brow of Tontena, the shallow valley that dipped across the Silver Mines Mountains, which stretched away as far as the eye could see, to the ends of the earth, it seemed, on a bright day. And the main road in the village below their house at the end of the lane, and the Shannon Callows, soft and lush below the village, and the river running through the Callows to the lake, glinting always in the low horizon, no matter what the light. But the world turned cold when Moll went, and what light was cast was dappled dark with shadow. She left no note behind, just made her bed and packed her few things into her mother's old leather valise and went through the door and across the yard without a sound. And she walked down the lane to the village, and she took the early bus to Nina and the train to Dublin. She'd withdrawn what bit of money she'd had in her post office savings account the week before. That was all they were able to find out. Frankie Welsh, the bus driver, said she'd seemed happy enough on the short journey in along the Esker line. Quiet, though, like always. She'd said hello to him getting on, and he'd said he thought it was going to be a fine day, and she'd agreed with him, and that was about it. It was only herself got on the bus in the village, Frankie said, and he'd been surprised to have to stop. He'd nearly driven past her, she was so small. The rest of the passengers that morning were the factory boys from Portroe. She'd sat at the front just behind his shoulder, well away from the factory boys, but he couldn't see her in his mirror, and he didn't like to be turning around in his seat, he said, and he didn't like to be asking anyone their business. He'd wondered about the valise all right, and the early hour of her journey, but that was the kind of wondering that a busman kept to himself, the unasked questions that filled his days. It went around the village quickly. No one really knew what to do or say. Still, Kit and Paddy were kept busy with the visitors those first few days. People climbed the lane up from the main road in twos and threes and walked the fields down from Jamestown and Bunnacree to sympathise and speculate and reassure. Kindnesses were carried from distant hills and up from the lake shore and laid at their door. Novenas were pledged, and envelopes containing handwritten petitions to Christ and to various saints, with clear instructions on timing and frequency of incantation, were left on the countertop, propped against bottles or crockery, the way they'd be seen. Never known to fail was printed large on the outside of one of the envelopes, and Kit folded that one away into her apron, and she patted it now and then to be sure it was still there. Things were gone funny lately, people said over and over. The world was changing fast. Everything was gone to pot. All that new talk and people's hearts and heads being turned, and the way they dressed now, and the terrible music. And wars going on everywhere. Vietnam and the Middle East, and only up the road in the God-forsaken North. Young people were being given terrible notions, and the world was a fearful place. People living together and having children before they were married at all, and married people roaring for divorces and birth control, whatever the hell that was, and every kind of carry-on you could think of, and plenty more you couldn't. But Moll had sense. She'd turn up, as sure as God. She'd land back any day. And Paddy and Kit stayed composed through all the talk and the heavy silences, and they turned deaf ears to the things that were whispered, that they weren't meant to hear, and they were grateful to their neighbours for the help. Kit had a cousin married in Dublin, and she wrote to her to ask if Moll had called to her maybe. But the letter...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?